Thank you for joining us today for a chat with Ben Loiz about the new SCBWI logo and identity. Ben was the designer for the new logo, and we're here to chat with him about his process, and we want you to learn so much more about him. Ben, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. How are you today?
Tamika, thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here to have this conversation and be able to share all the thought and the heart that went into this new logo and identity.
Well, we're super excited about it. I can't wait for everyone to see it. They will during this presentation. So tell me first, what attracted you to the project and what about SCBWI spoke to you that made you want to work on this particular project?
Yeah, I think first it was that it was an organization that is related to children's books, honestly. Children's books have been such an exciting part of my life, related to my sons growing up and our experiences together, reading books. And I felt that if I could attach myself to this organization that helps bring excellent or diverse children's books to the market for children, then my work can have a second leg in the sense that I can do a great job and make a great logo, but it can also help the organization to grow and help more people to make more children's books to help more children. And so that's what I mean by a second leg. On the one hand, you know, as a designer, we want to create great work, but I also want my work to be able to help people in the long run. So I think that was what initially attracted me to the project. And I was so excited to partner up on this.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like the organization and you, we were all in alignment, and we were so happy to be able to find you. We had a lot of applicants that submitted for this project, and you were the one of the people that stood out, and you were stellar in the interview as well as in the process. So speaking of process, tell me a little bit about your process and how you came up with the new logo.
Yeah, well, you know, oftentimes people might think logo design begins just by coming up with an idea, sketching it out, and making it. But actually, my process begins by getting to know the organization or the company, and that happens through conversation. Conversations are so important, and questions and answers and learning from one another. So in this project, we had a number of meetings together, phone calls, meetings where I was able to ask questions, learn about the heart of the organization, what you guys were hoping to get out of this rebranding, what the organization means to you, to look at the landscape, look at the different partners or various organizations or companies that you're in the same space with, to understand what the visual landscape you're in looks like. We developed a design brief, which really just collects all the information that was gathered and simplifies it so that we can agree, the design studio and the organization or the company can agree, yes, these are the goals of the project. This is where we want to head. And then from there, now there is information, there's research, there's strategy to create a mark that really expresses the heart of the organization and speaks to the desired audience of the organization. So in that sense, it's not just shooting in the dark and hoping something hits. It's the conversation, the research, the strategy that goes into the beginning of the project really helps direct even what will come out of the pencil onto the paper when that part of the phase begins. And when it does, I normally sketch a lot, actually. I sketch good ideas, bad ideas. I just get everything I can out of my head and onto the paper. And from there, so there's hundreds of sketches, hundreds of directions that are sketched. And from there, I begin to go back through them and consider which one or two or three of these directions really meets the mark of the brief, what really meets the mark of the things we discussed and agreed were the direction we wanted to go in, the new vision of the organization, and all of these things. And so in this case, interestingly enough, I tried to get myself to pick 2 or 3 options, but actually I just selected one. It kind of, I was led to this one direction, and I felt this is, we have to go in this direction and see where it leads us. And so then I began to bring it into Adobe Illustrator, a vector art program, and begin to create it and see what it could become. And I think as that process went on, and I started learning more about the owl, which we could talk about more in just a moment, it made itself clear that this was the right direction to go in. And so that's a little bit of the process. Of course, there's a bit more of, preparing materials to present to you all, but that's kind of how the initial process goes, the phases of kind of research, strategy, and sketching to really discover what this new identity could be.
So I love that you use the word discover, because you really unearthed what I believe the organization has been and will be going into the future. How did you come up with the owl being the right image for the logo? What was it about the owl that said, this is it?
Right. Well, I tried other things. I tried a kite, which the previous logo had a kite in it. I tried things like worms for bookworms. I tried things like elephants. I tried books, different open books, a fox, different animals. But when I got to the owl, I began to sketch different things. Actually, here's my sketchbook, and this is where I began to first sketch out ideas for owls, right? So there's a number here, and if you flip through the pages, there's more and more. And I began to get more interested. What is it about an owl? Because then I need to see, does this align with the vision, the goals, and the brief? One of the things we wanted to express is the diversity of all of the members of the organization. It's a worldwide organization. It's been around for so long, and we wanted to kind of show and display that kind of diversity that the organization has. Another thing that was important was that as the organization grows, there's more kind of digital applications that you need to consider, whether it's social media or digital platforms, app icons. We needed something that was simple and iconic. And then the third thing is that, generally speaking, it is related to children's books. So I felt it had to represent something of a story, or the idea of just point back to storytelling. So when I began to look into this, obviously an owl really points back to storytelling. There's a story behind an owl, and it really expresses something that relates to children, but also relates to wisdom, knowledge, books. Then as I looked more into owls, I realized that there is an owl on every habitable continent. And I thought, wow, every continent, every group of people on the earth has an owl. So I thought, that's great. It really hits the mark of this idea of diversity. And not only so, there are many different kinds of owls, different sizes, and even there's a bright green owl. And so as I began to craft the mark, those ideas were there. The last thing I needed to do is make it simple enough to be as big as a billboard or as small as an icon on your computer screen or your smartphone. And so began to kind of sketch and draw different versions of an owl, eliminating more and more and more. Some of the sketches that I just showed you, they were kind of detailed, looked like a real owl, eliminating more and more until it became an iconic symbol. And as I got to that point where it was simple, clean, recognizable, I began to consider the shapes within the face. And you'll notice that the beak of the owl kind of comes down in this very iconic shape. And that shape is actually the shape of a kind of the vintage writing pen nibs, which also points back to writers and illustrators. So this is how it all came together. And as each puzzle piece was being fit and lights were going off in my head, that were really aligning with all of our conversations and your goals and where we wanted this to go, it felt right. It was the right fit. And so I just began to see where it can go, clean it up and apply it to different kinds of graphics to see if it really was as flexible and as visually memorable as I thought it was. And then came the time to present. And you all, then it was up to you to see it and to respond.
Yes, yes. Well, I loved your explanation of why you chose the owl, but the fact that you added the nib and it was almost like a hidden image inside of the logo, to me was genius, because it meant that you actually saw and heard and understood who the organization is. And you're also honoring the fact that there's a history here, there's a purpose, and that we're all working for a specific mission. So I think that the logo is absolutely perfect, and I'm grateful that you came up with it. I have a question that's not quite about the logo. Do you have any, and you kind of touched on this, but do you have any connections with children's books in your own life?
I do. I mean, I remember, I've always remembered certain children's books growing up, but then years ago when we had our son, we just felt that right when he came home from the hospital, we wanted to begin to read. So we already had a number of children's books. And the first day, even though we knew he couldn't understand what we were saying, we just picked up a book and started reading it and began to read one book in the morning, one book in the afternoon where we put him down, one book in the evening. And it just became a time of bonding, being together and reading these books. And so we just got more and more books because we are interested in just spending that kind of quality time with our son. And as he began to understand more and grow, then we were reading, he was asking questions. And then as he began to grow and learn to read, then he would read. And so it's become a very kind of strong part of the life of our growing family is reading. And even at this, he's older now, and he sometimes comes home from school and he'll be quiet and reading in his room by himself. So I think it's just been a really important part of our family bonding and growing. I am here in my studio, some of the books that he grows out of, because he's not reading board books anymore. He's not reading many of the older children's books, but they're ones that I just loved, and there's so many memories that some of the books we give to other people, we pass along, and some I keep in my studio. So this is my design studio, but I have a whole section of children's books in here. So for example, this is one we loved when he was very young. It's called Little Blue and Little Yellow by Leo Leone. and it's a story that teaches color. You know, when blue and yellow meet, green is made. But these are two characters, little blue and little yellow. They hang out, they play together, and when they mix, they make green. And so it's really a story about color. Another one is we used to read a lot is I Know a Lot of Things by Paul Rand. And I especially love one of the last pages here, where it shows the image of a little boy or a little person there. And it says, oh, I know such a lot of things, but as I grow, I know I'll know much more. And all you see is a hat and some shoes, but you see the little person growing, right? So I love that simplicity. And then this is one we loved reading to each other. How Do I Love Thee? And it's just so sweet. You're just kind of sharing how you love each other as you're reading there together. So these are some books that really were an important part of the years of his growing up. And in fact, another relationship I have to children's books is ones that I've written. I haven't published a children's book yet, but I have written a number of them and illustrated a number that are in my computer, kind of waiting for their fruition or waiting for the time that they become a reality. But it's something I've always been interested in doing, both writing, illustrating, reading, but especially spending time with family through books and through reading stories.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that personal experience. And the other thing you reminded me of is that children's books are just as much for children as they are for adults. There's a connection that the books create for us to experience together, and that hold memories for us as well. So thank you for reminding us the importance of the genre of books that we create. So before we go, I would love for you to share with everyone, how can they learn more about your work?
Yeah, well, there are a few ways. I have a website, benloiz.com. My studio is a branding and identity design studio that helps clients with consulting, brand naming, logo design, and the full identity development, including the application, like how the logo plays out in the real world. And so you can, on benloiz.com, you can see examples of different identities and a little bit about the studio. That's also connected to an Instagram account if people are more apt to get on Instagram to look at work. I'm also a painter, and I have another website called shopotherthings.com. And that's where I introduced that side of my work to the world. And there you can see paintings, there are prints there, and a little bit about my background and history in painting. In fact, although I've been running an identity design studio for over 20 years now, I started in painting. I started with painting throughout my youth and in school. And so it's something I still do. So I think, and there's also an Instagram account for Shop Other Things as well. So those are probably the best two ways to learn more about my work, the two websites.
That's perfect. I thought there was only the graphic design, logo designer, brand identity designer, and now we know that there's also a fine artist in you. So thank you so much for sharing that. Ben, it has been a pleasure to speak with you today. I hope that everyone goes to check out your website. And I know that we're going to enjoy this logo for a long time to come. Thank you so much for talking with us today.
Excellent. And thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure to speak to you as well.